All right, let's move on to chapter 19 here. 5 o'clock the next morning found us all assembled on the roof of the temple. After the regular morning greetings, we gathered around, and as is the usual custom, a selection was read. The selection this morning was from the records of the temple. Jas translated them, and we were surprised to find that the translation closely corresponded to the first chapter of St. John in our Bible. And the second reading corresponded to the first chapter of Luke. After the reading, we asked if we might get our Bible and compare the versions. They readily consented, and with the assistance of Jas, we made the comparison and were surprised at the similarity. We had scarcely finished when the breakfast call sounded and all went in. After breakfast, we prepared to descend to the village, and for the time, the comparison left our minds. When we arrived, we found quite a number of congregated from the nearby country, and were told by Jas that they were nearly all shepherds that pastured their flocks in the high mountains in summer, and the time for leaving the lower regions was fast approaching. We were told that such a meeting as would take place that afternoon was always called just before the people departed. As we walked through the village, we met Emil's nephew, and he suggested we go for a short walk before lunch. We accepted the invitation readily, as we wished to see some of the country around. While we were on this walk, several places were pointed out in the valley as being of special interest. The names, when translated, very closely resembled those of the earlier Bible names, but the real significance of all this did not present itself until we had returned, had lunch, and were seated among those that had assembled. There were about 200 in this assembly when the rest of our friends from the temple appeared. Then Emil's nephew arose and approached two men holding what looked like a large book. When this was opened, it proved to be a box in the form of a book. He selected a package which consisted of flat leaves like those of a manuscript. When the box was placed on the ground, the package was handed to one of the men. He opened it and handed the first leaf to Emil's nephew. When the reading of each leaf was finished, it was handed to the other man, who placed it in the box. The reading proceeded with Jas as interpreter. It had not gone very far when we saw that it bore a striking resemblance to the book of St. John, carried out much more in detail. Then followed one similar to that of Luke, then one similar to that of Mark, and the final one was like that of Matthew. After the reading, the people collected in little groups, and we, with Jas, sought Emil, for we were curious to know the meaning of it all. We were told that these records were read each year at the meeting, and that this place was the center of the country where these scenes were enacted long years ago. We remarked of the country where these scenes were enacted. We remarked the similarity of these happenings with those chronicled in our Bible, and were told that there was no question but that some of the earlier scenes as chronicled in our Bible were taken from these records. But those happenings of a later date, such as the crucifixion, took place elsewhere, the whole reaching its climax in the birth and life of Christ. The foremost thought of it all was to search for the Christ in man and to show those who had wandered away from the ideal that the Christ lived in them as he always had. Emil went on to say, it does not matter where the scenes were enacted. It is the underlying spiritual significance which we wish to perpetuate. We spent the balance of the afternoon and the next day making comparisons and taking notes. Space will not permit the conclusion here of these notes and comparisons, but the spiritual meaning will be understood by reading these chapters mentioned above. We found that the father of Emil's nephew, who read the records to us, was born in the village and was a direct descendant of John, and that it was the custom for some member of the family to come to this place at this time and read these records. The temple above us was the one where Zacharias and John both had worshipped. We found that our friends wished to be on their way, so it was arranged that Jas would stay with us and the others would go on. We finished with the records the next day, then left the temple early the morning after. Although the hour was early, nearly all the villagers were up to bid us Godspeed. Okay, chapter 20. The next 5 days, our trail led us through the country that John had traveled. The 5th day brought us to the village where our horses were waiting for us. Here, Emil met us. From this time on, the traveling was comparatively easy to the village where Emil lived. As we neared this village, we could see that the country was more thickly populated, and the roads and trails were far better than any we had traveled. Our way led along the fertile valley, and we were following this valley to what happened to be a level plateau. We noticed that the valley was gradually getting narrower as we went on, and at last the walls came in so close on the sides of the stream that they formed a canyon. About 4 o'clock of the day we reached the village, we came suddenly to a perpendicular bluff over which the stream fell in a drop of about 300 feet. The road led to a level place at the foot of the cliff near the falls. We found that there was an opening cut in the sandstone on an angle of 45 degrees to the plateau above, and steps had been hewn in the floor of the upraise so that the ascent was an easy one. Great stone doors had been so arranged that they could be closed into the opening at the foot of the cliff, thus presenting a formidable barrier to an intruding foe. When we reached the plateau above, we found the stairway up the incline was the only means of egress or ingress that the creek offered. At one time, there had been 3 means of access, but the walls that surrounded the village had now been rebuilt in such a way as to bar all possible access. A great many houses in the village were built so that one wall formed a part of the wall that surrounded the village. We noted that when the houses formed part of the wall, these houses were usually 3 stories high, and there were no openings for windows in the wall until the 3rd story was reached. At the very opening, a balcony was built large enough for 2 or 3 people to stand upon comfortably. These, we judged, were arranged so that a lookout could be kept at all times. We were told the district was once inhabited by a native tribe that isolated themselves from the others until, as a tribe, they had disappeared, a few having been assimilated by the other tribes. This was Emil's home, and the place where we were to meet the members of our party who had divided into small groups in order to cover more territory. Upon inquiry, we found we were the first to arrive and that the others would be in the next day. We were assigned to one of the houses built into the wall of the village. The windows of the 3rd story looked out over the rugged mountainous country to the south. We were made comfortable and were told that supper would be served on the 1st or ground floor. We went down and found Emil, his sister, her husband, and the son and daughter that we had met at the temple a few days before, seated at the table. We had no sooner finished supper than we heard a commotion in the little square which the house faced. One of the villagers came in and announced that our chief and his party had arrived. They were made comfortable. Then we all proceeded to the roof. The sun had gone down, but afterglow still lingered. The view we looked out upon resembled a large basin at the confluence of a number of streams coming down in deep gorges from the higher mountains. These streams all entered the larger stream before it flowed over the steep wall of rocks into the valley below, thus forming the waterfall. This larger stream emerged from a deep canyon and ran over the level plateau, but a few hundred feet before it plunged over the precipice. A number of smaller streams flowed over the perpendicular walls of the canyon, cut by the larger stream, forming perpendicular falls, and in some cases, roaring torrents. It must have been beautiful. Some fell in sheer drops of roaring torrents. Some fell in sheer drops of 100 or 200 feet, while others had cut their way into the canyon wall and fell in a succession of cataracts. Far up in the mountains, the gulches were filled with glaciers, and these glaciers projected like giant fingers from the great snow cap that covered the top of the entire range. The wall to protect the village had been joined to that of the larger gorge, where it jutted out upon the level plain. They ran out to the cliff where the water dropped into the valley below. There, this wall joined the wall of the gorge. The mountain rose perpendicular for 2,000 feet, thus created a natural barrier as far as the eye could see. We were told that the level plateau extended for 60 miles east and west, and in some places was 30 miles north and south, and the only other means of access was at the widest part of the plateau, where a trail led over a pass, and this pass was guarded by a wall similar to the one where we were. Must have been some sight to behold here. While we were talking over the advantage of the location for defense, Emil's sister and her daughter joined us, and a little later Emil, his sister's husband, and son came up. We noticed an undercurrent of excitement and were soon told by Emil's sister that they expected a visit from their mother that evening. She said, "We are so happy that we can hardly contain ourselves, for we do love Mother so. We love all that have gone on to the higher attainments very dearly, for they are so fine and noble and helpful, but our own Mother is so sweet and adorable, so helpful and loving, we cannot help loving her 1,000 times more. Besides, we are of her flesh and blood. We know you will love her as we do." We asked whether she came often. The reply was, "Oh yes, she always comes when we need her, but she is so taken up with her work that she comes only twice a year of her own accord, and this is one of her semi-annual visits. She is to stay a week this time, and we are all so happy we scarcely know what to do." Here the talk drifted to experiences of our associates while we were separated, and we were deep in discussion when suddenly stillness came over all, and almost before we realized it, we were sitting perfectly silent, without a suggestion from anyone. Evening shadows had gathered until the far-off mountain snow-cap looked like a great white monster, just ready to loose its icy fingers and reach out over the valley below. From the stillness came a gentle swish like that of a bird alighted, and it seemed as though a slight mist were gathered on the eastern parapet. This mist suddenly took form, and there stood a woman, wondrously beautiful in face and form, with an intense radiant light about her that we could scarcely look upon. The family started to their feet and advanced rapidly toward her with outstretched arms, exclaiming, "Mother," almost as one voice. She stepped lightly down from the parapet to the roof and embraced each as any fond mother would, then was introduced to us. She said, "Oh, you are the dear brothers from faraway America that have come to visit us. I certainly am overjoyed to welcome you to our land. Our hearts go out to all, and we feel that if they would only let us, we would just put our arms out and embrace all, as I have embraced these I call mine just now. For we are in reality one family, sons of the one Father, Mother, God. Why can we not all meet as brothers?" We had remarked just before that evening that the evenings were growing chilly, but when this lady appeared, the warmth emitted from her presence made the evening seem like that of midsummer. The air seemed laden with the perfume of flowers, A light like that of the full moon seemed to pervade everything, and there was a warmth and glow over all that I cannot describe, yet there was no hint of display, just that deep, simple, kindly, childlike way. It was suggested that we go below, and the mother with the other ladies led the way to the stairs with our party following and the men of the household bringing up the rear. Then we noticed that although we seemed to be walking in the usual way, our feet made no sound upon the roof or the stairs. We were not trying to go quietly. In fact, one of our party said he deliberately tried to make a noise and could not. It did not seem as if our feet came in contact with the roof or stairs. We went into a beautifully furnished room. As soon as we entered and were seated, we noticed a warmth and glow, and the room was filled with a soft light that none of us could explain. All maintained a deep silence for a time. The mother asked if we were comfortably located and cared for, and if we were enjoying our trip. The talk led to general everyday subjects, and she seemed familiar with them all. The talk then led to our home life, and the mother gave us the given names of fathers, mothers, sisters, and brothers. We were surprised at the detailed description of each of our lives that she gave without asking us one question. She told us the countries we had visited, the work we had accomplished, and where we had failed. This was not told in a vague way that we would be obliged to piece together, but every detail stood out as plainly as if we were living the scenes over again. After our friends bade us good night, we could but wonder when we realized that not one of them was far less than 100 years old, that not one of them was less than 100 years old, and the mother was over 700 years, and 600 of that time she had lived on earth with her physical body. Yet all were as buoyant and light-hearted as though they had been 20, and nothing was assumed. It was as though youthful people were with us. Before they departed that evening, we were told there would be quite an assembly in the lodge the next evening, and that we were all invited to be present.